Guatemalan syphilis study. Just think, you go to the doctor for a routine flu shot and end up with syphilis instead. I know it sounds like a bad dream, but it really happened to over 1,300 people in Guatemala in the mid-1940s. The US Public Health Service decided to test penicillin by infecting people of Guatemala with syphilis without telling them. Because why ask permission when you can play God? If you were one of the lucky prisoners, they'd hire infected prostitutes to have with you. And when that didn't spread the disease fast enough, since syphilis can take about 10 days to 3 months to show symptoms, they just inject you with the disease directly. Because, you know, if at first doesn't succeed, try injecting it like some twisted IVF treatment. If you were one of those poor people, you'd start getting nasty sores, rashes, and high fevers. As the infection spreads, it causes severe pain and it even drives some completely insane. Eventually, many of them died from it. This gruesome experiment stayed hidden until 2010, long after the damage was done. The US government finally apologized, but that didn't make anything right because people who had suffered badly and ended up 6 feet under. MKUltra. Now, we all know the CIA has pulled some wild and not so ethical stunts, but this one really takes the cake. So back in the 50s, the CIA got paranoid that the Russians had cracked mind control. Naturally, they thought, why should we stay behind? And so Sidney Gottlieb, the mad scientist of this story, entered the scene. Gottlieb bought the world's entire supply of LSD, a powerful hallucinogenic drug, and sprinkled it around hospitals, prisons, and universities like it was candy. LSD makes you feel like your brain is melting with wild colors everywhere, and you're questioning everything. It's like falling down a rabbit hole and seeing things that would freak you out. It can be fun, but also really scary. His goal was to erase minds with LSD and reprogram them. Let me tell you a secret, it didn't work. They knew using celebs would make LSD look cool, so the CIA used famous people like authors, songwriters, celebrities, and even a crime boss to promote LSD. It started popping up at parties, music festivals, and even college campuses. What made MKUltra so scary was that the CIA took it up a notch by bringing in Nazi doctors and Japanese torturers. Because who better to get ethics advice from than history's most notorious torturers? So these people set up secret labs worldwide, turning people into lab rats with electroshock, isolation, and extreme temperatures. Think the Saw movies, but with a government budget. The side effects were brutal. We're talking terrifying hallucinations, severe paranoia, and permanent psychological damage. If you were one of these test subjects, you'd be stuck in a waking nightmare, with your sanity as stable as a Jenga tower during an earthquake. In the end, they figured out that mind control wasn't happening. Gottlieb, the mad scientist, tried to destroy the evidence, but some documents survived, showing how sick these experiments were. Pit of despair. One day, you wake up from a deep sleep in a silent room, not knowing how you got there. The darkness is suffocating, you panic and scream, but the silence eats your cries. Welcome to another twisted CIA experiment, the Pit of Despair. This evil experiment was also run by the same mad scientist behind MKUltra. The psycho came up with another mind control theory. Total isolation could wipe someone's mind clean. So he got the CIA to build these dark, silent rooms where unlucky souls were left alone with no light or sound. If you were one of the chosen ones, you'd be trapped in a pitch black box for days. It's definitely not the kind of me time anyone would be looking for. But wait, it gets worse. The CIA didn't just stop at isolation. They decided to step it up and create their own version of American Horror Story, but with drugs and less glam. They gave these poor souls daily doses of LSD, making them see wild hallucinations. They shocked them with electricity, leaving their brains scrambled, literally. And they messed with the temperature so much, it felt like being bounced between a sauna and a walk-in freezer. The test subjects were mostly prisoners, mental patients, and other people who couldn't fight back. They went through terrible hallucinations, extreme paranoia, and permanent psychological damage. Some people were never the same again. Some even died from the torture. Unit 731. You thought your parents creating you was the worst experiment ever? I guess you never heard of Unit 731, the Japanese Army's sick lab of horrors during World War II. If you ever thought dissecting frogs in science class was cruel, these guys went full mad scientists on real people. This group of mad scientists cut people open while they were still alive. Yep, live vivisections were their thing. Oh, and it didn't stop there. They cut off limbs and then reattached them to different body parts. Female prisoners were forced into pregnancy for experiments, experiments that were beyond messed up. They injected them with diseases like syphilis to see how it affected their unborn babies. They even cut open pregnant women while they were still alive to study the fetus. Death experiments were their favorite. If you were a test subject, you were in for a nightmare. They'd starve you just to see how long you could survive without food and water. You'd get thrown into low-pressure chambers until you literally exploded, crushing, electrocution, and even spinning you to death like some twisted amusement park ride were all part of their gruesome playbook. If you thought that was bad, you're only scratching the surface. They froze people, burned them, and exposed them to extreme radiation, all in the name of science. It's like the worst sci-fi horror movie that you can think of, except it was all too real. Cincinnati radiation tests. Medical history is packed with gross, ugly stories that can make you scratch your head. Sure, some brought cool medical advances, but the Cincinnati radiation tests took things to a whole new level of what were they thinking? During the Cold War, from 1960 to 1971, some doctors at Cincinnati General Hospital thought it was a brilliant idea to zap cancer patients with enough radiation to light up a small city. Their goal was to figure out how much radiation soldiers could handle in a nuclear war. If you are one of the unlucky patients, you'd have no clue what you signed up for. They'd hit you with the equivalent of 20,000 chest x-rays in just a few hours. The side effects were pretty darn ugly. We're talking nausea, vomiting, brain fog, and oh yeah, death. 21 patients kicked the bucket within a month. Talk about killer treatments. For over a decade, these experiments went on without anyone bothering to get written consent. When they finally did use forms, they conveniently left out the whole might die part. Real smooth, patients were treated like lab rats, suffering horrific side effects while the doctors took notes. Jump to 1994, when people started paying attention again. Families of the victims sued, and the University of Cincinnati settled for over $4 million in 1999. They even put up a memorial plaque to honor those who suffered and died from these experiments. But in a final twist of irony, the plaque got moved to make room for, wait for it, a parking garage. The Cincinnati radiation tests are a dark chapter in medical history, showing just how twisted things can get when the goal overshadows the means. The Milgram experiment. What if someone in a suit came to you and told you to kick a guy off a bridge? You'd say no, of course, but in the 1960s, a guy named Stanley Milgram wanted to see if people would follow orders to hurt someone else just because a scientist in a lab coat told them to. The result of this effed up experiment was a total disaster, obviously. So imagine you were in the experiment. A guy in a lab coat would ask you to shock a learner, an actor, with electric currents every time they answered a question wrong. The shocks got stronger, and the actor's screams got louder and more painful. You kept cranking up the voltage, making this the worst game of Simon Says ever. But here's where it gets twisted. Milgram's researchers sometimes didn't follow the rules, and many participants guessed the whole thing was fake. Some people just went along to see how far the experiment would go, so they shocked the actors too much. Others figured out that the screams were coming from a 1960s tape recorder and not a real person, but they kept playing along anyway. In the end, the Milgram experiment showed a scary truth. People obey authority figures, even if it means hurting someone. This experiment has been repeated many times, proving that yes, people are still shockingly obedient. The Stanford prison experiment. You walk through a dirty hallway in nothing but skimpy underwear. 8 other guys are with you, all looking just as lost. Across from you, 9 lazy guards hurl insults, making you do humiliating things like cleaning toilets with your hands and stripping naked. Then you're stuffed into a tiny closet and have a bag shoved over your head. With every passing hour, the guards get meaner and you feel more beaten down. Some of the other prisoners start to break under the cruel treatment. One guy has a full-blown panic attack, another decides he's on a hunger strike, and a few just sit in a corner crying like they've lost their Wi-Fi signal. But let me tell you a secret, this isn't a real prison. This isn't a university in California. You're not a criminal, you signed up for an experiment, clueless that it would become one of the most infamous studies in social science history. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks to see how people react to authority and prison conditions, but it went off the rails in just 6 days. Guards were told to break the prisoners' spirits and went all in, inventing sick punishment punishments. The guards turned into mini tyrants while the prisoners just tried to survive the madness. To make matters worse, this experiment was led by a professor who was so into it that he didn't see the disaster until his grad student, whom he later married, go figure, told him to stop. After the experiment ended, nobody went to jail, but questions flew. People wondered why it wasn't stopped sooner, why the guards became so cruel, and why this experiment is still taught today, despite being a chaotic mess without a control group. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Experiments. Welcome to the madness of the Stateville Penitentiary malaria study, where science and ethics teamed up to reveal just how deplorable humanity can get. It's the 1940s, and some brainiacs at the University of Chicago decided it'd be a brilliant idea to turn prisoners into human guinea pigs to test anti-malarial drugs for the US military during World War II. First, they needed volunteers. They got the prisoners to sign up for the experiment by promising them early parole. 441 prisoners, all white males in good health, lined up for their ticket out. Most were between 21 and 40, and they had to be malaria virgins to keep the results clean. Here is where it gets gory. Doctors bred mosquitoes, infected them with malaria from a military patient, and then let these bloodsuckers feast on the prisoners. Each poor soul got bitten by 10 infected mosquitoes. Then it was pill popping time. Every 4 hours for 6 days, they downed gel capsules filled with experimental drugs. Yum! After 8 days, the real fun began. Doctors drew blood daily, and if a prisoner got a fever, they got the VIP treatment. Rectal temperature checks, pulse and respiration recordings every 4 hours, and blood pressure readings. If their temperature hit 101 degrees Fahrenheit, it was every 30 minutes. Ethics? What ethics? The whole thing was super sketchy, with prisoners volunteering under pressure. The study raised huge concerns about consent and human rights. Eventually, the Nuremberg Code came along, making it clear this kind of stuff is a big no-no. After multiple episodes of fever, one man even passed away after a heart attack. Although the researchers insisted it wasn't the study, but we all know that they definitely created the circumstances. The Stateville Penitentiary malaria is a grim example of a scientist experiment gone wrong and the importance of informed permission. Maybe give it a second thought if someone offers you early parole in return for serving as a human lab rat. Slave experiments in the antebellum South. Gather around for a not so fun history lesson about James Marion Sims, the father of modern gynecology. He was basically a real-world monster with a medical degree. He conducted his research on enslaved black women without any anesthesia. Yeah, no pain relief at all. This guy used to borrow slaves from their owners just to run his twisted tests. When the owners started saying no, he went ahead and bought the slaves for his mad experiments. Sims had some wild ideas, like thinking a baby's skull bones moved around during long births. To test this, he used a shoemaker's awl, yes, a tool for shoes, to poke around the skulls of babies born to enslaved women. The result was a 100% fatality rate. Every single baby died. Sims blamed the mothers and midwives for the deaths instead of his own terrifying experiments. Sims saved lives later with his medical breakthroughs, like understanding vaccines better, but at what cost? Torturing innocent women and children. It's a weird part of history where a monster's deeds ended up benefiting humanity. We owe thanks to those who suffered, but we can't forget the cruelty. Some say these awful experiments sped up science, but the ends don't justify the means. Sims took a fast track to hell with his so-called good intentions. We should remember his medical breakthroughs, but also his total lack of compassion. History isn't always pretty, and James Marion Sims made sure of that. His legacy features medical breakthroughs, but also reminds us that sometimes even the worst villains get credit for the group project.